The South China Sea is once again the scene of a tense military standoff. This region, rich in resources and strategic importance, has long been a flashpoint for international tensions. The waters here are claimed by multiple nations, but none more aggressively than China. In August 2025, the USS Higgins, an American warship, sailed near Scarborough Shoal on a freedom of navigation mission. This mission was part of a broader strategy to assert international rights to navigate these contested waters freely. The U.S. Navy called it routine, but China saw it as a direct challenge to its sweeping territorial claims. The Chinese government has long maintained that these waters are an integral part of its territory, despite international rulings to the contrary. Beijing quickly dispatched naval and air forces, accusing the U.S. of illegally entering its waters. The rapid mobilization of Chinese forces underscored the seriousness with which Beijing views these incursions. The U.S. 7th Fleet rejected these accusations, insisting the Higgins was operating within international law. They emphasized that the mission was a lawful exercise of freedom of navigation, a principle upheld by international maritime law. Both sides issued firm statements, refusing to back down. The rhetoric from both Washington and Beijing was unyielding, each side defending its actions and condemning the others. This was more than a minor disagreement. It was a dangerous encounter between two military giants, each with its own rules. The potential for escalation was palpable, with both sides prepared to defend their positions. The incident highlights how quickly disputes over small reefs can escalate into global flashpoints. These seemingly minor territories hold significant strategic and symbolic value, making them hotly contested. With warships operating in close quarters, the risk of miscalculation is ever present. A single misstep or misunderstanding could lead to a serious confrontation, with potentially dire consequences. The world watches, anxious about what could happen if the next standoff spirals out of control. The stakes are high, and the international community remains on edge, hoping for a peaceful resolution to these dangerous encounters. Why risk so much over the South China Sea? This vast waterway is a global crossroads. Trillions in trade pass through its lanes every year. Beneath its surface lie untapped reserves of oil and gas, and its waters are rich fishing grounds for millions. Control here means economic power, energy security, and food for entire nations. Strategically, whoever dominates the sea can project military power across Asia. That's why nations are building military outposts on tiny islands and reefs, turning them into fortified bases. Overlapping claims have created a web of disputes simmering for decades. These aren't just lines on a map, they affect real people, economies, and governments. The US-China clash is only the latest sign of a rivalry that's growing more dangerous by the day. At the heart of the conflict are clashing claims over territory and resources, which have deep historical and geopolitical roots. China's 9-dash line covers nearly 90% of the South China Sea, citing historic rights that date back centuries. This claim is based on ancient maps and historical records, which China argues give it sovereignty over these waters. The Philippines, on the other hand, bases its claim on geography and international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. According to UNCLOS, features like Scarborough Shoal fall within its exclusive economic zone, giving it rights to resources and activities in these waters. For Manila, China's presence is seen as a violation of its sovereignty and an encroachment on its territorial integrity. This has led to numerous confrontations and protests, with the Philippine government and its people standing firm against what they perceive as Chinese aggression. The United States, while not claiming any territory in the South China Sea, insists on the principle of freedom of navigation for all nations. The U.S. views China's expansive claims and militarization of the region as a direct threat to global trade routes and international legal norms, prompting it to conduct regular patrols and freedom of navigation operations. These three positions, China's historical claims, the Philippines' legal rights under international law, and America's commitment to global principles, form a complex triangle of tension. Each nation believes its stance is justified, creating a challenging environment for diplomacy. Each side believes it's justified, leaving little room for compromise. Diplomatic efforts have been made, but the deeply entrenched positions and national pride make finding a mutually acceptable solution difficult. The result is frequent standoffs and confrontations at sea, with naval vessels and aircraft from the involved nations often coming dangerously close to each other. These incidents heighten the risk of miscalculation and potential conflict. This isn't just about rocks and reefs, it's about who sets the rules for the world's most important waters. The South China Sea is a critical maritime corridor, with trillions of dollars in trade passing through it annually. Control over this region has significant economic and strategic implications. The stakes are high, and the path to resolution remains elusive. International courts and arbitration have attempted to address the disputes, but their rulings are often ignored or rejected by the parties involved. The region is left in a constant state of uncertainty, with the potential for conflict always looming. The world watches closely, hoping for a peaceful resolution to this complex and high-stakes dispute. In 2013, the Philippines made a bold move on the world stage, taking China to an international court in The Hague. The case challenged the legality of China's sweeping 9-dash line, a claim that covers nearly the entire South China Sea and overlaps with the exclusive economic zones of several Southeast Asian nations. For years, tensions had simmered over fishing rights, oil exploration, and the construction of artificial islands. But this legal action marked a turning point in the dispute. After 3 years of hearings and deliberations, the 2016 ruling was clear and unequivocal. China's expansive claims had no legal or historical basis under international law. The tribunal found that China's activities, including building artificial islands and restricting Filipino fishermen, violated the Philippines' sovereign rights within its own exclusive economic zone. The decision was hailed as a major victory for international law and for smaller nations standing up to powerful neighbors. Yet, despite the binding nature of the decision, China flatly rejected the ruling, dismissing the tribunal as illegitimate and refusing to participate in the proceedings. Chinese officials insisted that the court had no jurisdiction and that their historical rights in the South China Sea were indisputable, setting the stage for ongoing confrontation. Since then, Beijing has only increased its presence and military activities in the disputed waters. Massive land reclamation projects have transformed reefs into military outposts, complete with runways, radar systems, and missile batteries. Chinese Coast Guard and Navy vessels regularly patrol the area, often clashing with ships from neighboring countries. This open defiance of the tribunal's decision has sent shockwaves through the international community, raising concerns about the future of the global rules-based order. If a major power can ignore a binding legal ruling, what does that mean for the authority of international law? The United States and its allies have made it clear that they view the 2016 ruling as definitive. In response to China's actions, they have stepped up freedom of navigation operations, sending warships through contested waters to assert the principle that these are international seas, not the private domain of any one country. By sending warships through these areas, the U.S. and its partners demonstrate their commitment to upholding international law and supporting the rights of smaller nations. These patrols are not just symbolic, they are a direct challenge to China's expansive claims and a signal that the world is watching. The dispute has evolved into something much larger than a fight over territory or resources. At its core, it is now a test of whether powerful nations can simply ignore global rules when it suits them, or whether the international community will stand together to defend the principles of law and fairness. The world is watching closely, as the outcome of this standoff will set a precedent for how international disputes are resolved in the future. Will law or force decide the fate of the South China Sea? The stakes could not be higher. The South China Sea is a vital artery for global trade, with trillions of dollars worth of goods passing through its waters every year. Any disruption here would have ripple effects across the world economy. Ultimately, the outcome of this dispute could shape the international order for years to come, influencing not just the fate of the South China Sea, but the future of global governance and the rule of law itself. The U.S.-Philippines alliance is anchored by the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. This pact promises mutual protection if either is attacked. Recently, the alliance has grown stronger as China's assertiveness increases. The Philippines has granted the U.S. expanded access to its bases, allowing for rapid response to crises. Joint military exercises are now larger and more complex, signaling unity and readiness. With Chinese vessels growing more aggressive, the Philippines relies on U.S. support. The U.S. has clarified any armed attack on Philippine forces in the South China Sea could trigger the treaty. This commitment raises the stakes for China and deters escalation. South China Sea tensions are deeply connected to the Taiwan issue. China claims Taiwan as its own, while the U.S. supports Taiwan's self-defense. The Philippines, just 200 kilometers from Taiwan, is caught in the middle. President Marcos has warned that conflict over Taiwan could spill into the Philippines. He's drawn a red line. If a Filipino is killed by Chinese forces, it could be considered an act of war. The U.S. shares this view, linking the Mutual Defense Treaty to such incidents. Expanded U.S. access to northern Philippine bases is as much about Taiwan as the South China Sea. For the Philippines, balancing Chinese pressure and U.S. support is a delicate act. The risk of a great power conflict on its doorstep is very real. The U.S.-China standoff followed a chaotic incident between Chinese and Philippine vessels at Scarborough Shoal. Chinese ships collided while chasing a Philippine patrol boat, showing how quickly things can spiral out of control. China's Coast Guard has repeatedly used water cannons and dangerous maneuvers to block Philippine vessels. These tactics have damaged boats and injured sailors, escalating tensions without gunfire. Chinese vessels have also used lasers to blind Philippine crews, further raising the stakes. For Filipino sailors and fishermen, these aren't abstract disputes, they're daily threats to safety and livelihood. Each incident pushes Manila closer to its U.S. ally and hardens its resolve. With warships and aircraft from multiple nations operating in close quarters, the risk of miscalculation is rising. A single mistake, a sharp turn, a close flyby, could trigger a crisis. The recent Chinese ship collision is a warning of how quickly control can be lost. If a Philippine vessel had been hit, it could have crossed a red line and sparked conflict. Southeast Asian nations like Vietnam and Malaysia watch nervously, fearing they'll be caught in the crossfire. U.S.-China tensions on trade, technology, and Taiwan add fuel to the fire. The South China Sea is now the world's most likely flashpoint for a direct military clash. The consequences could be catastrophic for the entire region. The South China Sea will remain tense and unpredictable. China is unlikely to back down, continuing its strategy of intimidation and control. The U.S. will ramp up freedom of navigation missions and joint drills with the Philippines. Diplomatic rhetoric will stay sharp, and the risk of miscalculation will persist. Southeast Asian nations must defend their rights without being drawn into great power conflict. The world's economy depends on these waters. Any conflict would send shockwaves globally. The real test: will disputes be settled by law and negotiation or by force? The world is watching, hoping restraint prevails over confrontation.